First, we have Jeff Polzer, the UPS Foundation Professor of Human Resource Management in the Organizational Behavior Unit at Harvard Business School. And we also have Matthew Brett, lecturer in data science at the University of Birmingham. We have Gabor Csanyi, professor of molecular modeling at Cambridge University in the engineering laboratory. And lastly, Carlos Mendez, associate professor of development economics at Nagoya University in Japan. He's also the founding director of the Quarks Network, a community of scholars that conducts research on quantitative, regional, and computational science. So very grateful that you four are here. We will be discussing who should learn data science, very broad, very general topic. And Jeff, I mean, if it's okay with you and I'm not just surprising you too much, I would love to hear your thoughts just to start us off.
Absolutely. So thank you for organizing this whole session. I really enjoyed those talks already and took copious notes for my own teaching. The question, who should learn data science? I come at this from a perspective of people in business, and certainly agree with Robert and what he's doing in Mongolia, that the data revolution is upon us, obviously. I think everyone should learn some aspects of data scientists just to be citizens of the world, especially during a pandemic with lots of data coming at us. Our business school students, I teach at Harvard Business School, our MBA, our master's students, increasingly need to operate in a data-driven world. I'm in an organizational behavior department. I'm not an economist, I'm not in marketing, I'm on the people side of things. And yet even there, organizations around the world are using employee data in all kinds of new ways. So anything you do digitally creates data, and companies are starting to use that for better or worse, depending on your perspective. And so I created a course about people analytics, also known as HR analytics or talent analytics. And what I do in that course is I take cases, so real situations that we create, we write these cases. And then my goal is to have cases that also contain a data set where the data can analysis of the data can lend some insight into the issues in the case. So it's always an applied problem of somebody in an organization facing a situation, whether it's who to hire or who to promote or who to put on a team together. And then the question is, are there data that can help to answer the questions that are in the case? My students are not going to be data scientists. But increasingly, they're going to need to be able to work with data scientists. And so then the question is, how much data fluency or data literacy do they need to be able to do that effectively? And I'll tell you, lots of HR people in large organizations are asking the same question about their executives and managers and saying, we need some training in the ways of data science and statistics to help our people become more fluent, not because they're necessarily going to be doing the code, but because they're going to be on the receiving end of lots of advice and recommendations based on data analysis. So I'll just say my take is that I want my students hands-on doing code. I happen to use R, not Python. I want them to be doing statistics themselves, so that exposure, with the premise that exposure can help them become more fluent and more comfortable and more conversant with people then who they work with who have deep expertise. So I'm happy to talk about lots of ways that I try to do that. One of the big things is to make it really easy for them, for the novices among them. And I have high variation in my classes, but for the novices to get directly into some code and output. And so last year, for the first time, I used Deepnote, and I give them starter code. So for the first time there, the first class we have, all they simply have to do is run the code and see the output, and then we talk about it. But then the next class, they have to do a little bit of their own code. And we just build kind of an analytic arc that's the goal anyways, to build that into the course. So that ideally by the end of the course, again, they're not experts in code or statistics, but everybody has, gone up the learning curve to be able to operate more effectively, including managing and leading organizations that are awash in data, and that have lots of data scientists doing, lots of work in that regard. Let me stop there, and in the interest of time, and turn it back over to the rest of the panel.
I can pick up on a word that you said there, Jeff, which was statistics. We could have asked this question in the 30s and 40s and 50s when science started to become mainstream in schools and universities. And we could have asked who should learn statistics. And of course, the answer was everyone, all natural scientists, which is my world of engineers, chemists, physicists. And I think who should learn data science is the 21st century question that's equivalent, because we interact with our experiments and with the questions that we want to ask about the world through data. And if you don't know how that works, then you can't speak that language. In my department, there has been a bit of a flip-flop in how much programming we teach. So it's a general engineering department. So we train 350 students every year across all of engineering, which is a sort of an educational nightmare in one sense, because there isn't time for anything. So so you have a big programming course and go make everybody go through that. Or, and this is the way my department's been gravitating recently in the last decade or so, programming is not one of your courses. It's everywhere. It's all tiny little bits scattered across every course. That's the road we've gone down. And when that happens, we have to bring the students with us on that journey and say, no, we're not going to teach you programming and you're not going to get examined on it. But of course, we expect you to know it. So how does that work? We have to inject the interaction with the computer and with the data in tiny snippets. Here's a little exercise there. Here's a bit of analyzing data from that experiment over there. And that's how I think of infusing them with not just data science as a packet, but programming and data and using modern infrastructure. And that's how I ended up using Deepnote, because I have to support these students who are writing their first Python for loop ever. And how do I support them interactively in a way that it doesn't turn them off and it doesn't become a complete chore with me losing 30% of the class. So what really got me going with Deepnote is the sharing, is the sort of instantaneous sharing and of course this was pre-pandemic, and you can imagine what happens when suddenly everyone has to do it from home. We used to sit with the students in a very large computing room, but now that's not possible, and I could do my course essentially unchanged by getting into every student's notebook and not solving. I wasn't doing help desk. I wasn't solving their problem. I was asking the leading question, which I could only do if I could see their wrong code right there, and I could make one change which didn't give you the answer but showed them the problem, and I could execute, and they saw it, and therefore that student was nudged on. So it's been actually quite an amazing experience for me.
I think that's a really sort of important parallel, sort of statistics and data science, and it's got some sort of important lessons as well. I don't know whether you guys know the sort of history of this, but initially the statistics departments thought that they should be teaching the statistics. I think that there was a gradual sort of realization that statistics was going to be very important for scientists. And initially the statistics department said, okay, we'll teach that. But then that didn't happen. And, I suppose the question is open still whether that was a success. So what tends to happen, and my training is in medicine and psychology, and, we got taught by non-specialist statisticians. I mean, who probably actually didn't know the mathematics or couldn't derive the mathematics on which the statistics was based. But that brings me to the sort of question, which I think is kind of really central to this question about, who should learn, which is, what is it? What is data science? And Eric, who's I think on the meeting has heard me on this multiple times, but it seems to me that it's very important that we think sort of really hard and are able to articulate the answer to that question. Because it's clearly something to do with programming, right? It's clearly something to do with data. It might be something to do with statistics, but over and above that, what is it? And the reason we need to know that is, of course, in order to explain to our sort of colleagues and the other people working in our institutions, why the students need to do this, but also so that we can concentrate on the things that the students really need. Is it programming and then something else? Is it statistics and then something else? And I suppose I was hoping just to mine for some controversy here, but I'm going to sort of more or less go for the sort of Berkeley. I'm sorry, I was at Berkeley, but not involved in the data science program before I came to Birmingham, and I've been very much inspired by the sort of Berkeley model. But I think they've got a really good answer to that question, which I think is really worth reflecting on, which is that it's using computation as the first approach to understanding data, and using computation as the way to explain how inference works. So it's not just you can do some programming, you can analyze some data. It's sort of, yes, get the data, but once you've got the data, use code to explain how the algorithms work. And my experience so far has been it's just massively more compelling for the students when they can actually sort of get in there and do it. They can actually sort of, for example, a permutation test. It's such a huge advance over a t-test in terms of explanation. Like every student, I was taught as a doctor and then as a psychologist, really badly. And there's a t-test, and just everybody wants to do t-tests, but they didn't really know didn't know why or how it worked or really anything. And there's permutation tests. You can really, once you've got the for loop going and an array, you can understand the permutation test right down to the absolute depths of the statistical the depths of the statistical ideas, and it's really liberating, and it gives the students a whole different way of thinking about data and how they would analyze stuff. And they're constantly they should be constantly thinking, oh yeah, just give me what the model is, and I'll try and work out how to do that in the computer, and then I'll see whether the model fits the data. So I think it's a real transformation in how we think about understanding data, and that I think has big implications for sort of who should learn it, and also how we should teach it.
If I can complement what it has been said, well, Jeff started highlighting the importance of data science for within a company or within the firm. And then Gabor and Matt, they highlight the importance of understanding data for scientific research. Let me go to another direction, which is understand data for social and economic development at the macro level. So I teach in a development school. In particular, I teach development economics. And just for the sake of the argument, let me share my screen so I can illustrate this point. So I think most of you have seen this famous TED Talk, and many data scientists are highly motivated by the ideas, but the visualization skills of Hans Rosling. And these are the concepts, and these are the key messages that I like to discuss with my students. And these ideas are surrounded by data, and this important concept that if we do not see the actual data, we can be ignorant about the world, that the world from a data perspective might be different, and we can actually work with the data to go even deeper. So what I really like about this data science approach is that it allows us, and we say everybody, to understand the world better. And this is one great example of the power of data science. And it's not the only one. I really enjoy reading these articles from our world in data. And there are great topics on many issues such as poverty, food, agriculture, health. And the beauty of this is when you open any article, all the data, it's available there that you can download, that you can explore, and then you can put the data into Deepnote and you can go one step farther. So what I would like to highlight here is that data and data science in particular is giving us a way to understand the world in the first place. But second, once we have better data to make decisions, we can also, as citizens, we are in a better position to demand accountability of leaders or politicians when there are debates and they are talking about this number or the other number. Where, first of all, where does that number comes from? And can I get access to that data to verify, is that number an outlier or is that a long-run tendency? So those are important issues that any educated citizen has to try to ask questions about it. Any number that we hear in the news, is that just an outlier to make a soundbite, or is that really a long-run tendency? And what I really like of the Hans Rosling approach is that he focuses on long-run tendencies, that in many cases, the news, they do not focus on long-run tendencies. They just want to capture the short-run message. And I think we professors and anybody in the world who wants to really have a more informed opinion, I think now more than ever, we have the data. And I think Deepnote is giving us the tools to explore that data.
Does anyone have any actual stories of students who didn't think that they could do it and then they got programming and they got interested in data science? I mean, I have one of my own, to be honest with you, that really resonates with what Matt was saying, because I also came from psychology and went through all the theory of statistics. And it really wasn't until people who knew how to code and knew data science took me under their wing and showed me how MATLAB worked. And I could see the mechanics of the theories working. It wasn't until that, which was like years later, that I actually started to feel like a scientist. So if you have any thoughts on that, I'd love to hear some stories.
I teach 2 data science courses, which sort of basically now cover the same ground as the Berkeley course does. So it takes basically through to multiple regression and machine learning, but from a sort of permutation perspective. Yeah, the feedback was really good, and I several times got people saying, oh, I really didn't think I was going to be any good at this. I really didn't think I could do it, but and it was hard. It really was hard, and that was my favorite bit when they said it was hard, because they got it. But they really got very excited. So I mean, this relates back to the previous talk. So it's as I think all of our experience, when you get to the project stage and they're doing their own data in collaboration with other people, the projects are just they're really it's the only experience of marking where you kind of really you start feeling really warm, sort of most of the way through, because they're clearly, watching the students presenting them, they're starting to interrupt each other because they're getting so excited about it. I mean, it's really been hugely rewarding, which, is the opposite of the experience of most people teaching research methods. Most people teaching research methods can have to go and have therapy afterwards because the students hate them so much. But it's been great. It really has been really very, very pleasant watching the students getting really fired up.
I've had some great experiences in that regard too. We, in addition to the MBA program where I teach, I'm doing a short version of the same kind of people analytics course in a new executive program. It's actually about 3 years old now, but it's jointly offered between our statistics department, our computer science department, and the business school. And it's about a 9-month certificate program. I just teach a 2-week kind of seminar in the middle of it, but for me, it's been fantastic because I now know my colleagues in the statistics and computer science department, and have something that we're working on in common in terms of this whole program. The students, when they get to my class, they've already had some courses in statistics from those folks and computer science. And then they get to my course, which is about, employee issues, and they're like, well, what are we going to do with all our statistics stuff there? We have some data sets, and we do some predictive modeling. And for some of the students, you can say like, oh my God, we're going to use this code again. I thought I just finished with that. But then they get into the class, and especially allowing them to collaborate with their peers, some of whom are fantastic with code and statistics. And you can see the excitement, not only individually of like, oh yeah, I can actually do this and I can use what I've been learning, but also they like cheer on their classmates who then teach, and they start teaching each other in ways that, for me, that's really rewarding to see. And by the way, some of the students teach me. I'm not, I have enough expertise, but in this stuff to teach it. But some of the students will do things that they'll be screen sharing. I'll be saying like, explain that. How did you do that? What is that? I haven't seen that before. And it just frees everyone up, I think, to let go of the feeling threatened or insecure. Oh my gosh, am I going to be exposed? Instead, it's like, oh my gosh, we're all in this together. For me, the saying that you don't learn R, you learn how to do some things in R is very freeing. And I try to convey that with the students. And then ideally in the class, we develop kind of a climate where regardless of where people are, they can all get excited about kind of moving their own, moving themselves up their own learning curve.
Listening to the stories, but also prompted by Carlos, I'm struck that not about the academic experience, but the dinner table experience. So the dinner table conversation in the 90s is, I heard X. X is, related to, the most striking ones are always about personal risk. Should I do something or should I not do something? And, I heard X from some friend. Maybe it's true. We don't know. Sounds interesting. The same conversation in 2000s with internet, I heard X. People open their laptop or take their early smartphones out and say, hey, here's an article about this. It's a bit biased. I don't know who wrote it, whatever. Okay, it's a bit more. And then that conversation in now, and I've had this several times in my own household. I heard this. People whip their phones out and here's some data about it. And it's not yet data science in that academic sense. We don't yet do something with it, but it's so ubiquitous that personal decisions about what we do about the holiday in 2 weeks' time get influenced by somebody's curated data set that I can interrogate depending on where it comes from and depending on the sophistication of the website, which has an immediate impact on perhaps millions of tourists. And I think this is amazing. This changes how we relate to the world through data, not in the academic sense, but in the very personal sense. And you asked about how people who weren't data scientists. This is happening to people who are not scientists at all, who used to, in my own family, people who are not comfortable with numbers and even counting the digits and the relative probabilities they lead to is not common, but that's changing because data is on the forefront of everyone's mind. And I think someone mentioned this before in this discussion, that the pandemic is amazing for that. We have not only on national news, but you open up the UK newspaper and our graphs, well annotated, well labeled, multidimensional with different views. And that's the front page, day after day after day now for a year and a half. And that to me is a new world, a much more, a utopia in a way.
From an experience of one of my students. So I teach development to students coming from relatively poor countries. And the first time when I show them, look, this is an interactive graph of a variable that you're interested in. And that variable is summarizing the living conditions of your country. And that variable in a book in the old system is just a black and white static graph. But now you have the tools to discover how to create that graph, and how to update that graph and how to compare that graph with another country that you might be interested. So today, compared to, let's say, 10 years ago, you have more interaction with the materials. And that is just great because the learning that comes out of that interaction is much more engaging than 10 years ago. Just imagine, when I learned macroeconomics, it was essentially a black and white textbook where all the graphs fixed. But nowadays, all the data is changing continuously, and I can compare my favorite country with other countries. I can understand how these gaps evolve, and then I can start asking more questions, because before the answer was the tendency is going up, and that's it. But now I can compare that tendency with other tendencies, and I can change the projection and other things. So nowadays, I'm really, it's a great topic, and it's also it's a great time to teach and learn from a data science perspective.
Do you think it's possible that we're going to generate a new generation of data dilettantes? I mean, one of the lessons we've learned is that, as widespread amounts of sort of more sources of information become available, it becomes easier and easier to sort of lock onto the particular thing that you're interested in, the particular set of people that you're interested in. And so you can persuade yourself that, that you have the correct answer because you've looked at some set of numbers. But you really don't know how to deal with controversy in numbers and randomness in numbers and sources of bias in numbers. So people, people can get the data, they can view the data, they can make beautiful stories out of the data, but they don't know how to prevent themselves being deceived by data.
Yeah, I think that's a huge, really important question. And in fact, in kind of my notes, that's one thing I wanted to make sure to mention before this panel was over. So thanks, Matt, for bringing that up. But one concern I have, frankly, with my students is that by the end of the course, they gain a whole lot of confidence in their statistical abilities, but it's actually overconfidence relative to their core understanding. And so now, what are we unleashing on the world is somebody that thinks okay, now I've got the data part as well. And kind of alongside that, there's another distinct question, which is motivated use of data. Exactly to your point, Matt. So I'm in an organization and we're making a decision and I have an answer that I want to get to. And the question is, okay, how can I harness data, to convince others of what I want, what's best for me? And of course, that's happened ever since people, walk the earth. But now, are we putting tools, at their disposal to ramp up their ability to do that? And, to what end? So, one small thing I do in class is while trying to teach about data is to emphasize not like, okay, here's what we should do, here's the action we should take, and the data support it, but to emphasize the variation in the data, confidence intervals rather than point estimates, things that are inherent in the data that should increase in some ways our humility or our openness to other points of view rather than, just honing in on one solution. Or a friend, Scott Page at the University of Michigan, has this idea of many model thinking and wrote a book about it. And I love that idea. And he's saying, in this world of data and so many models, rather than us trying to figure out what's the one best model to guide our decision, let's actually seek out multiple types of models that make different assumptions and come to different, arrive at different results in order to stoke our debate and critical thinking about whatever we're trying to do. So I bring that into the classroom. And so all of that is to try, Matt, to your point, to try to not leave people thinking like, okay, now statistics will give me the answer. And I'm, after one course that's not even a statistics course, I'm ready to go. So I think it's a really big deal in this world.
I'm going to jump in with a question that we have in the chat. Jeff, do you, this is from Nathan Carter, by the way, do you intentionally group the code-oriented students with the communication or application-oriented students on Teams?
Yes, absolutely. So I do a survey as soon as the enrollment has settled, because it's an elective course. I do a survey to get people's self-reports of how much expertise they have and what other courses they've taken and what their background is in statistics and R code and other types of code. And then I use that immediately to pair people up or put them in. We have some labs and workshops, and I try to put people together. And by the way, shout out to Deepnote. The last year was the first year I used it. This year I'm going to do much more, referring to some of our prior speakers, where I use the collaborative capabilities embedded in Deepnote to have groups of people work together in ways that are much more visible, and try to figure out, how to do that for learning individually, for learning in groups, and learning for the whole class. But I think there's just way more we can do. Yeah, the one thing I'll say is that the dangers, like not danger, but like what I don't want to happen is that I put people in a group, and the people that don't know code as well say like, okay, great, let's divide and conquer. You do the code because you know how to do it. We'll do the other stuff. And no actual learning takes place. So I try to structure activities in ways that allow everybody to learn. And by the way, the people that are really good mathematically and statistically aren't always good at explaining it to other people.
I mean, I guess I was going to ask the panel or any of the participants how to help the students worry about being wrong. I don't think I've done a very good job on that. We tend to give them these really nice examples, and it's kind of quite clear what the answer is, or these, great historical success stories. So Berkeley's got this wonderful example of the John Snow and the cholera outbreak. But I think it was actually another course in Berkeley where Annie Edakari was talking about the error made in hormone replacement therapy. So it was concluded after sort of doing studies that that women taking hormone replacement therapy sort of had better health outcomes than women who did not. And then later on, they did a randomized controlled trial, and they found out that it was the opposite, and they reversed their advice. And the problem was it just wasn't possible in the initial studies to control for the various sort of confounding factors. And people who women are more interested in their health, more likely to talk to their doctor, were also more likely to take hormone replacement therapy and sort of had better health outcomes for reasons other than hormone replacement therapy. And I remember sort of talking to one of my friends about this, and they were sort of very struck by this example. It's quite familiar to me as a doctor, that kind of example, but where we kind of gave very definite advice, we were quite sure about it, and then we turned out to be wrong. And I think that's the problem that I don't manage to convey to my students. Worry about being wrong. Look at it from multiple different angles. Think about how that could have been wrong. Think about where the bias might have come from. Can we really rely on that? And if not, how would I know? I guess I'm going to ask the panel whether they've come across any good ideas for that.
So I'm hearing several of you mentioned the dangers, right? I don't see the danger. I see the opportunity, because we are at least talking the right language. So, right, this is the broader point of, if I show you data and I base my if I base my evidence on the policy that I want, if I do that in a data-based way, I'm open. You can scrutinize it. Whereas if I don't, when people didn't, it's a dogfight. But if you're actually numerate, then we are speaking the right language. And the study that you mentioned was correctly analyzed, except that when new data comes, the conclusion changes, and that's a lesson that everybody needs to learn. So I'm grateful for being able to talk in the right language about these policies, whereas before you can't.
On the idea of being wrong and how to learn from it and how to communicate it to students. So one of the most interesting experiences that I had with my students was some of the papers that we read, they come with data, and we try to replicate the findings of the papers. And some of my favorite papers are those who have some errors. And then the first message is, look, there are papers that we are reading, and there are other papers out there that they are published papers in top journals, and they have mistakes on them. Some of those mistakes have been acknowledged, others probably don't. But the first step is to show students that even in science, even in published journals, there are mistakes. And it's interesting to, first of all, to see that people, professors, or highly respectable scholars make mistakes. And anybody can make a mistake and learn from it. And that aspect of data science and the replicability aspect of data science is really fundamental. That nowadays it's really important to pick those papers that provide both data and code and learn from that. And if they make mistakes and we can learn from those, of course, we can learn from our mistakes. And I'm also happy to tell my students that when I wrote a paper, I made this mistake at the beginning, and then I learned from it. So just communicating and showing specific examples that there are problems with data analysis, that there are assumptions that are weak. And if we change some of those assumptions, the conclusions might fall apart. I think it's a great experience to share that with students nowadays.
I'll just add quick shout out to design thinking concepts and methods, where to me, so that has kind of pervaded the business world, especially the startup world. And it emphasizes, the cliche fail fast, but whatever you think of that, the idea of like have a hypothesis, get some data and test it, and then iterate and keep iterating with the idea that you're not going to be right the first time. That's like our students love that. Design thinking. I'm all about design thinking. To me, it's the scientific method. You line up design thinking principles next to the scientific method, and you're like, that's basically the same thing. So I try to tap into that to say, whatever we conclude right now, what actions are we going to take, and what data are we then going to collect to test whether that action was effective, and plan right now to keep going and keep learning and keep iterating, rather than thinking that, okay, we found the right answer, let's stop. So I that's an attempt. Whether it works, I guess I should collect data.
I think Liz has a question as well.
Yeah, thank you, Alan. I'm going to advance myself. I'm working at a work. So first of all, thank you all so much for spending the time with us today. It's a fantastic panel. And I appreciate all these extra resources that you're sharing. I'm personally a big fan of cohort-based learning and social learning. And from that perspective, I imagine that the pandemic must have been hard for you and your students, even if you did use Deepnote before, like Gabor did. So I'm curious, can you share any experiences, any creative ideas that you pursued to sort of build engagement with your students during this sort of remote period, either in classes or outside?
Okay, I can give you something that happened to us. So many of our students do field work. Okay, so we study development. Doing field work, it's an important component of development. But now we cannot go to other countries to do field work. So what can we do in this case? Well, the first step was, instead of working with primary data sources, let's go to secondary data sources, and let's try to find whatever data source that can be a close replacement. And the topic, of course, is the coronavirus. And we were looking for data, and some of the interesting substitutes that we found is, if we cannot get micro data from field work, and right now official statistics in developing countries are not coming so frequently, what can we do? Now, the answer that some of my students are trying to obtain is coming from satellites. So essentially, they came from going to the field and ask their questions in the field, to going to outer space and use satellite nightlight data to understand how lights are changing daily and see how the economic activity is really being reflected in these alternative data sources. So to me, it was a problem, but it gave us this tremendous opportunity. Let's move from the ground to outer space, and then let's see what we can learn from there.
It's almost a cliche that when high schoolers learn math, they complain that, they'll never need it in everyday life. And I know that when I was studying mechanical engineering, I felt like I would not really need statistics, as foolish as that sounds now, as somebody who studied data science as a master's afterwards and everything. It seems really foolish, but I know that mentality is out there, right? There's a little bit of hostility towards learning something when it's not immediately obvious where you'll be using it. So I wonder what is, my high school teachers, they had the classic response in math that it's you do need it in everyday life, but it was never a very satisfying answer. So I wonder if you had kind of go-to answers about how do you inspire people to learn data science as people who can see it, just like I do, can see it as an essential skill nowadays, when it's not so obvious when you're just getting started in learning it.
I mean, I must say, so I teach sort of two groups of students, taught to two groups of students. So one is sort of really quite a short introduction to using R for a very large range of, undergraduate students. And I must say, I kind of went for the sort of like frightening thing, which is sort of, yes, you can do some of this stuff in Excel, but you won't be nearly as effective. When any job that you're going to go into next, so I was teaching people for geography and biochemistry and so on, psychology. Any job that you go into, you are going to find that you're going to have to analyze data. So if you find yourself analyzing data with ineffective tools and not really understanding how to do this properly, you're going to be in trouble. And that's, basically we're teaching them heavy duty tools for heavy duty work because that's the work they're going to be involved in. So I know that's a bit negative, but hey, I'm British, so being negative is just part of my DNA.
That's fair enough. Do you ever, I guess maybe this is more for you, Jeff, but do you ever get students who, I guess they're familiar with all the BI tools that are coming out there, and BI tools are getting quite good at anticipating kind of the data questions that you have. And some very, very optimistic people, I'm maybe not one of them, might say that in 5-10 years, you won't need data science skills because you'll have these auto ML and auto data science solutions for you. Well, I guess now it's kind of shifting the question, but do you think that's true? And if it's not true, is it something that you have to communicate with your own students?
Yeah, this is something I think that this will be the 6th year that I've taught this course, and every year I've adapted it and changed it based on what other courses are in our curriculum that students are taking in advance, but also, what should I be teaching? And it's still I have as many question marks as answers, I think. But to that point, and to the comment just made, one thing I tell my students is we are not using Excel. You all know how to use Excel, and that's not what we're doing. And I think about version control, replicability, collaboration, all these things that code allows you to do. And so these are MBA students and executives, but I'm like, this is what we're doing, and this is why we're doing it. From a statistics point, I'll just add, I use regression analysis as a foundation, as an analytic technique, but also as a way of thinking about the world. And with the idea that, and to increase your critical thinking. So if we're going, we used our intuition to make a decision before, but now we're going to use some data. All right, what's your outcome variable? Now we have to debate and agree on what our outcome variable is going to be. What model should we use? What variable should we have in the model, and what are they measuring? That's a debate. That's a discussion. And it forces precision, because you have to have a variable. What are you going to use? So I kind of use it both to say, we're going to learn how to do a statistics, some statistics techniques, but it's almost, in addition, not a metaphor, but a way of thinking about cause and effect in the world. And that if you're testing one thing, you should actually have control variables. What are they? Why, okay, let's think about all the things that could be causing this, not just the one thing you're focused on. And then machine learning, there's all kinds of, once you kind of are thinking in that way, great. Now we can add in some machine learning or whatever else we want to do, but we have this mindset. So for me, to come back to your question, when we start automating these tools, what I don't want is for people to be automating their thinking. And so when I don't know how that's all going to play out, but for right now, I'm kind of focused on getting into the nuts and bolts of a regression equation as a way to think about the world. And then once you're there, you can go in a million directions. But But yeah, and so I worry about automated.
I completely agree.
Stuff.
It's, I think once you think about it as kind of a pattern matching, I mean, for in your case, it's logistics, but it really, at the end of the day, it's generalization of, taking a complex phenomenon and generalizing to a few parameters on the more mathematical side, right? And once you think about that, and I really like how you brought up the debate where once you don't phrase it as, okay, plug in your X, now you get your Y, plug in your X1 and X2, now you get your Y, and it's more as a question of what are X and what is the Y, even some you don't know what the Y is. Once you learn that, then I think it starts becoming kind of interesting to actually dig into the problem, not just the solution, right?
Thanks everybody for the amazing discussion. I'm going to move us on to our second panel discussion, but before I do, I want to just say again, thanks Jeff, Matt, Gabor, Carlos. I really appreciate the insightful conversation.